Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. It's great to be back with you. And Laurie mentioned this, but, you know, everything I do now that I typically do on an annual basis as governor, I am mindful that I am doing it for the last time as governor. I have always enjoyed coming over and speaking to the Rotary Club here in Baton Rouge, and I've always enjoyed the meal, too. So I just want to thank all the folks at Drusilla, because when you have to put together a meal for this many people and to have it as good as it was, that is special. So I thank y'all for the invitation. Thank you for them. Now, y'all know we finished the legislative session at 6 p.m. on this past Thursday. Typically, and this is the 8th regular session as governor, I lost track of how many sessions overall. The 8th regular session, typically by this point in the next week, I know exactly what happened and didn't happen, and whether things were in balance and whether they're not. And I have a better idea today than I certainly had on Thursday night. But we're still working on the money bills that were delivered to me on Monday. But we'll talk about some of that. And I'm going to try very hard to finish my remarks so that you have an opportunity to ask questions. If you saw the session and the way that it ended, you know that it just kind of went to the very last minute. They were still getting votes on the most important bills of the session. You know, because it's an odd number year, it's a fiscal session. The most important thing you do is you pass a budget and you pass the money bills. Well, it was actually the things that received the least consideration. You didn't have the debate. You didn't have, and by the way, she's a dear friend of mine. Where's Barbara?
She's right there.
Barbara Freiberg is a legislator, and she does a wonderful job. I want to thank you. And I don't think Franklin is here. I know Franklin Foyle, who's a senator, is also a member. But Franklin is a dear friend and has been for a long time as well. But at the end of the day, and I don't say this as a reflection on Barbara or Franklin or really most legislators, they were not given an opportunity to digest what they were voting on. They knew they didn't want a special session, and they voted for the bills, but there's some challenges that we have to overcome, quite frankly. But the situation today can only be contrasted with what it was 8 years ago, and that's really where I want to start. So I'm very thankful of the work that we've been able to do on a bipartisan basis, which is still possible in Louisiana. It is much harder than it used to be, and it's harder than it should be, but it is still possible here. And I can highlight it this way. The bulk of the budget discussions this year were on whether, and if so, how, to appropriate $2 billion that was in surplus and excess. Not the $2 billion deficit that we inherited. While we have $2 billion in the bank, the most that we've ever had in our savings accounts. And so from that perspective, things are not just different, they're an awful lot better. And it wouldn't have happened without a lot of good bipartisan work. I can assure you all that just like it is in your businesses and in your families, surpluses are better than deficits. And there's a reason we have surpluses. And by the way, we've had a surplus every single year that I've been governor, every one. It is because we never put one-time money to recurring expenditures. We always took the lowest forecast for revenue for the next fiscal year. And if we had a trend line of growth in the revenue, we would spend recurring revenue on one-time projects so that we stayed on the glide path to where we are today. And that's really important. And we've been able to accomplish some really good things. This year, We were able to get a $2,000 pay increase for teachers and $1,000 for our support workers. Unfortunately, and I do mean this sincerely, it was not, and it gets kind of technical, but we didn't do it by adopting the MFP resolution, and therefore the increase is outside of that and so forth. But it was evidenced by language in the budget bill and in two separate resolutions that the intent of the legislature is this be recurring additional pay, i.e. a permanent pay raise. I have every expectation that next year when the resolution gets to the legislature, it will have this additional funding in it so that it does become a real pay raise. There just wasn't a reason not to adopt the resolution this year. We had a very solid forecast in terms of revenue growth. We did have the money in the bank, and the future looks good. And I guess it's disappointing to me that we didn't adopt the resolution, but we did give additional funding for our teachers. That funding increase brings the total increase since 2019 to $5,300 for our teachers. There was significant new funding for early childhood. And this is a double-edged coin and a two-sided coin, and I just want to point it out. The most state general fund ever to support early childhood education is in the budget. That was that $44 million that we got for the program. But at the same time, we lost $150 million of federal money that was available to us because of the pandemic that's no longer available. So while it's the biggest, most robust effort we will ever have in terms of our funding, we will lose seats next year. Seats that are available today for our young people, they will not be available next year. But because we were able to get that $44 million, we will not lose as many seats as we otherwise would have. And so I appreciate that. And by the way, the one thing well, not one thing, but I guess the thing I'm most appreciative to Barbara about is she was a real champion for early childhood education, and she went toe-to-toe with folks who for some reason just didn't see the value in it. And she's the big reason why we got the funding increased to $44 million, and I thank you very much, Barbara. Major investments in higher education, and Lori told you that James Williams is here. He's a member of the LSU Board of Supervisors. She's also a member of the LSU Board of Supervisors, and thank you for your work on that. We're going to waive fees for members of the Louisiana National Guard to attend public higher education institutions. That's the least we can do. When you think about how often we call on our National Guard soldiers and airmen, and how long it takes many of them to complete their degrees because of the frequent deployments and so forth, the least we can do is waive those fees. There is a 20% permanent supplemental pay increase for law enforcement and firefighters who are qualified for that supplemental pay. Excited about that. Historic investments in roads, bridges, ports, and other infrastructures. Historic payments towards debt, various areas of debt, which is obviously a good thing to do. Investment in the state savings accounts. By the end of this calendar year, once all the accounting is done, when we close out the year on June 30th, in just a couple of weeks, and we make all the transfers and so forth, our state savings accounts will have $3 billion. Grand total of $400 million the day I became governor. So we had a $400 million in the rainy day fund and a $2 billion deficit. We will have $3 billion by the end of the year in those savings, or just right at $3 billion in those savings accounts. We increased funding for the Fortified Roof Program, for the Insure Louisiana Incentive Fund, for the Port Priority Program, other critical priorities for our state, and I'm very happy about that. There's some things in the budget I'm not happy, and there's some things that aren't in the budget that make me very, I have to scratch my head because things that were clear priorities for the state that didn't make it, and I know you've You've seen some of the news coverage about the Jimmy Davis Bridge. You've seen some of the news coverage about the new terminal at the Port of New Orleans in St. Bernard that is no longer in the capital construction bill. I don't understand that at all. But at the end of the day, we are, as I said, in a much better place. But with all the additional funding that we had available to us, and despite the fact that we were again directing record amounts of recurring revenue to one-time expenditures, at the very last minute, and unbeknownst to just about everybody except for a handful, there was a $100 million cut to the Department of Health, which when you try to figure out what that really looks like, because those dollars are used to match federal dollars, that cut would actually be in the neighborhood of $400 to $500 million were it to happen. I'm looking at all my options, and I will use every means at my disposal to minimize or eliminate those cuts to LDH. And we're just not going to do that on my watch. The very first day I was governor, I signed Medicaid expansion because I believe people need more health care and not less. And we're not going to do that. Some other priorities, the National Guard Patriot Scholarship Program that I just mentioned to you, the Cybersecurity Commission that we actually had done through an executive order is now in statute to coordinate between local, state, tribal, and federal governments. And by the way, cyber attacks happen much more frequently than most people in this room realize. They are very hard to deal with, and they can be extremely costly. And so trying to get in front of that as best we can. Chard mentioned a while ago what you all do because you believe in literacy, and you've done this every time I've been here, and I assume you do it every week, is you give a book.
Yes, sir.
Well, I believe in that too. And through the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, we're going to make a book a month available for every child in the state of Louisiana from age 0 to 5. All they have to do is sign up. All they have to do is sign up, and this is a great program. We know the difference it makes to have books in people's homes. And if a child, you could sign the child up before they ever leave the delivery room. And if you do that, there will be 60 books in that child's home before they ever start school. LPB is going to administer that for us. CC's here. Thank you so much for your work on that. There are other things, and I'm going to wrap it up here in just a minute. Not just related to the session. I did want to sort of give you all an update. So we've invested over the now 7.5 years that I've been governor, more than $5.5 billion in transportation projects, including 7,000 miles of road improvements. We are set to receive $1 billion over the next over the 5 years of the bipartisan infrastructure law for the bridge program, and we're going to allow locals to tell us the bridges that they have, not state-owned, that they need replaced or repaired, and we're going to put about $300 million to the local bridges as well. And over that 5-year period, we will do 5 times as many bridges in the state of Louisiana as we otherwise would have done. We're absolutely committed to closing the digital divide by 2029. That means affordable, true high-speed internet available at every residential and business address in the state of Louisiana. I believe we will not only meet that goal, but we will exceed it. We took $177 million of rescue plan money, leveraged it with the private sector, the internet service providers, for more than $300 million, and we already have targeted 80,000 addresses, and we're delivering high-speed internet to those addresses faster than we thought. The grants are being completed right now in about half the amount of time that we thought, and this is the Gumbo program. Sometime in mid-September, the federal government's going to award the first really big grants under the infrastructure bill. I believe Louisiana will be among the first, if not the first. We will get about $1.25 billion that we will then match with internet service provider money and keep doing the same thing to get to the other 350,000 or so unserved addresses out there. And you don't hear this very often. The one place that I can absolutely tell you there is no state in the country outperforming Louisiana. It is in this effort to expand broadband service. In fact, the Department of Commerce, the NTIA, they're sending other states to Louisiana to replicate what we have going. And Vineeth Iyengar and his guys in that office just have done a tremendous job. I'm excited about that. We now have over 500,000 working poor Louisianans with health insurance. That was the very first thing I did as governor. And it will be the thing that I'm most proud of when I leave office. It was something we needed to do both to help close the budget gap that I inherited, but also just to deliver health care to working poor people who needed it. And today we went from having one of the nation's highest uninsured rates to an uninsured rate below the national average. In Louisiana, we haven't lost a single rural hospital. If you look across the South at other states that didn't expand Medicaid, many have closed, and many more are on the brink of closure right now. And there's a lot of other reasons, including the assistance that's available for behavioral health, mental health, and addiction disorders and so forth. But it's absolutely the right thing to do. And it costs us no more than 10 cents on the dollar. And the 10 cents is put up by the hospitals because at the end of the day, they're delivering less unreimbursed care. And it's worth it for them to put up the 10 cents because their bottom line is better when they are so much better reimbursed. And that's why they're stronger. That's why they're not closing. And because they're putting up the 10 cents, the general taxpayers in Louisiana are not. But if someone remains uninsured and they go to the hospital, it costs 40 cents on the dollar to care for them. So while my predecessor said we couldn't afford to do it, the truth is we couldn't afford not to do it. It was exactly the right thing to do for all of those reasons and many, many more. Look, I've got a little less than 7 months left in office. I want to just tell you that it has been the honor, obviously, of my lifetime to be able to serve. And to be able to serve and to be reelected, and Laurie mentioned some of them, there have been some very challenging times. I have always been inspired by just the inherent goodness and decency of the people of our state. So I thank you for the opportunity. I thank you for the work that you do to improve our state every single day. And know that every single day for the rest of the time that I'm your governor, I will be getting up and going to work. You're not going to have to worry about me. I'm going to be working. And when I leave office, our state, in many, many ways, will be demonstrably better and stronger than it was the day I became governor. And I don't attribute that just to the work that I've done, but the work that we've been able to do together in our state and the work that I've been able to do with the legislature. Because look, it's hard. Y'all know I'm a Democratic governor with a Republican majority, and to fix our problems, we didn't just need a majority vote, we needed a 2/3 vote on many, many difficult things. And maybe it took longer and we had to have more special sessions than I would have liked. But at the end of the day, we were able to do it. And I'm immensely proud of the collective effort that has been put in, even if there are some instances where I just have to scratch my head and wonder, what the hell were they thinking? And I did a lot of that since Thursday night at 6 o'clock, by the way. And I think y'all are probably going to ask about a little bit of that, so I'm going to pause now and take a few questions.
No, I'll just make a mention to this. If you would, with the large crowd that we have here, we have microphones on either end of the table. So I would ask, if you have a question, please raise your hand. We'll try to get a mic to you so that everybody can hear. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks, and great to see you again. Can you share with us what your future plans are?
To the extent that I know them. No, Donna and I, we've maintained our home in Roseland, in northern Tangipahoa Parish. I will be going back there with my lovely bride, and I have a law license. I intend to practice law and do other things as they become available, and they seem like something that I would be interested in. But I love every day that I do what I do, but I am starting to look forward to going home. And I will tell you this: there are a lot of things about our law our laws that I scratch my head about. 2 terms is right. The 2-term limit is exactly right, because by the end of the first term, you've just become so much more efficient in doing your job, and by the end of the second term, you're just exhausted, right? So I think the 2-term limit is right, but we're going back home to Tangipahoa Parish. I'm glad I'm not the one calling on folks.
Governor, we've heard a lot, this is on and up. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
We've heard
I'll
a lot
repeat the
from
question.
Candidates for governor about the murder rate in Louisiana and what they're going to do about it. Can you talk to us all about the tools at their disposal as a governor?
Sure. So the question was about the crime rate, particularly the violent crime. Obviously, it's much higher than any of us would want it to be. And a lot of times the attention is placed, and for good reason, given the numbers, on places like New Orleans and Baton Rouge. We actually have some rural parishes where the rate of violent crime exceeds that of those other areas. The earliest indications from this year, and at least this was true the last time I checked, and I haven't checked in the last few weeks, is that it appears we may have peaked and may be coming down on some of the violent crime rates. I certainly hope that's the case. But the tools that you have at your disposal, they run the gamut, and you got to decide whether you're going to, and it's not, you don't do some things to the exclusion of others, but some things that you do are very long-term. And you know that they're going to help, but you got to make those investments early on. And an obvious example of that is that early childhood education. The better educated a citizenry is, the fewer problems you have of every kind you can imagine. You have less poverty, you have less poor health outcomes, you have less crime, you have all of that sort of stuff. So that sort of thing. You can then go and you can identify your areas that are really hot for crime. In Baton Rouge, we know there's a certain zip code that is responsible for more violent crime than anywhere else. The good news is we have $5 million in the budget to go up there from the state's perspective to match with local money and nonprofit money and some funding that's being provided by folks like Exxon and so forth, this Inspiration Center in North Baton Rouge. I mean, that's something that you can do. So you're engaging the community, but especially the children and their families, and they're interacting with law enforcement every single day in a way that is not adversarial, that hopefully builds relationships and trust and that sort of stuff. And that's a model that we can then, once we do it successfully, and I'm confident it'll be successful, we can do it everywhere else. We need more behavioral health treatment and addiction disorder treatment. And we're making headway. The Medicaid benefits do include those treatments. And I'm never going to suggest we're doing all that we should, but we are doing better. We need more law enforcement officers. Y'all know coming out of COVID, and it's still the case today, I mean, we have the lowest unemployment ever measured in our state for the last month that it was done, right? There are open jobs, multiple jobs open for everyone who's actually looking for work. And I'll just use Drusilla's. I don't know if they had this problem. But if they had a problem getting workers to either cook or to serve, they would just limit their hours, or they would close the dining room. When you have sheriff's offices and city police departments that are short on law enforcement officers, they can't just call a timeout and say, y'all can't do any crime right now. No, but just think about that. Those challenges are very real. So that 20% increase in supplemental pay for qualified law enforcement officers is really important if you're going to attract and retain. And we need to do more of that. We need to have more and larger state police academies. We're doing that. But there is no short-term solution to this problem. And everybody acknowledges that it is a real problem. And we're working with local law enforcement and the federal government on summer task forces that have proven effective in the past. You're going to see that continue and so forth. But it is a particular challenge for us, as it is across the country. But my last remark is going to be about something related. It is not. The spike in crime that we've had here in Louisiana bears zero relationship to the criminal justice reform that we did in 2017. And that has been proven by groups like the Pelican Institute out of New Orleans, who studied what those reforms were and who benefited from them. By the way, practically all of that aimed at nonviolent offenders, nonviolent, non-sex offenders that we were imprisoning at a rate 3 times the Southern average, even though our crime rate never was better as a result of that. And we're investing the savings in anti-recidivism programs. And we can show you that, but because of the increase in crime, there's this instinctive reaction from the legislature. And we've seen it here in Louisiana forever. It is, you do things to just be tougher on crime. You cannot incarcerate your way out of this. We've learned that lesson. And these investments that we're making, they are working. But it takes courage in the middle of an increase in crime to say that I stand by the criminal justice reforms that we did in 2017, and for those legislators to do that as well. But I stand by those reforms. And not that we can't make some changes on the margin. But the spike in violent crime in Louisiana was less pronounced than it was in states that didn't do any criminal justice reform. And so if you just look at the data, you know, but it takes a long time to communicate that with people. It takes 10 seconds to say, I'm going to lock them all up and keep them there forever. And some people think that's a good idea, I guess. It's never worked for us. It has never worked for us. So that's a long answer to a short question.
Directly back here.
Governor, just a thank you comment from me. A problem you didn't touch on, but you've been very involved in, is helping with trafficked teenage girls.
Yeah.
And you and your lovely wife have been honorary co-chairs of the Emerge Gala every year. So thank you for that, and I hope Stephen and Colleen carry that tradition on.
Well, let me tell you, the human trafficking and the especially the sex trafficking is a huge problem across the world, across the country, and it is here in Louisiana. And anybody who doesn't believe that, I mean, your head is in the sand. I mean, it's just what we years ago just looked at as being a juvenile delinquent or somebody who, I guess we just assumed that they were criminal. They were always victims. We just didn't identify them as victims, and we didn't do enough to put those pimps out of work, you know, and that's where. So we all have work to do there, but raising awareness, training people, whether they're educators, whether they're in the healthcare profession, whether they are in law enforcement or social services, whatever, what the signs are, you know, and that's where Donna has been so busy. As for the last comment, Stephen's a good friend of mine. And I have no doubt that should he be here this time next year talking to you as governor, he will continue and amplify the efforts around human trafficking.
Governor, I want to thank you childhood money that was so desperately needed. But you also mentioned a reduction in the numbers that were caused due to the federal monies that we were getting. Is there a plan to bridge that gap?
Yeah, well, the difference is so large. I just told you, the $44 million that we appropriated to put on top of the $36 million base that we invest in the program is the largest state general fund effort ever. But at the end of the day, that didn't come close to offsetting the $150 million that we're losing. So the way you do this is you've got to do it in a sustainable way where you take bite-sized chunks that you can actually digest. But it is a hugely important effort. And it is my absolute belief that early childhood is an area where we cannot afford as a state to only fund it in the good times, in the prosperous times. If it looks like a yo-yo and 1 year the funding is up here and the next year it's down here, we are failing our children. And if we want the educational outcomes here that we all aspire to, and I think we do, we have to invest consistently for a generation. And when we do that, we will transform education in Louisiana. We will achieve much, much better outcomes. Because the truth is this, and this is, we can demonstrate this with all the data that you want to see. Louisiana schools educate children who show up ready to learn about as good as anybody. But we have way more than our fair share of children who show up and they're not ready to learn. And we don't catch them up very well. But the truth is, nobody catches up those kids very well. They just have fewer of them. And so if we want to reduce crime in the long run, if we want more prosperity and less poverty, if we want better health outcomes, if every good that we want to increase and every bad thing that we want to decrease, you can tie it to education. And if we will just, not only in early childhood, but especially in early childhood, if we will invest heavily and smartly and do it for a generation, if we will stay on the path that we've been on the last few years, we will transform our state in a way that we have never been able to do it before, and I am 100% convinced of that.
Governor, I think we
I think it's 1 o'clock. Thank you all very much.